Now, I have to say from the very outset that this appears to be a very sensible bill, and it will, in fact, receive the support of myself and the Legalised Cannabis Party. However, there is the concern about the devil being in the detail. And I have to confess also my particular prejudice against bureaucracy, where people who are not at the active front can pontificate upon how to manage what can be quite difficult cases, and guessing with the benefit of hindsight how someone should have proceeded. My personal opinion as to the code of conduct is that it really is actually quite an ancient code of conduct. Do no harm. In any sense, do no harm. It really is not that difficult. But then it comes to the question of the codes, or many codes of conduct for the different areas of the alternative health management. And you have to wonder, who sets the code? Now, we heard just a little while back the excellent contribution from my friend, the Honourable Stephen Pratt, about the LGBTQI approach and conversion therapy. I couldn't agree more. It wasn't so long ago that to say that in public would have earned the scorn of the masses, and certainly the colleagues in the House. Is it not true that the idea that someone could have a sexuality different from what passes for normal, and by here I would under what normal actually means, the question that that could have at all been contemplated would have been far from the public mind. And yet we could have people imposing their particular code of conduct. Imagine, if you will, if Scott Morrison was in charge of a committee about code of conduct and decided to have a Pentecostal approach to managing wellness. Yeah, I know it's quite shocking. When let's wave the hand, say prayers, and you will be cured. And if not, you're a friend of the devil. Now, I've actually witnessed that. I've witnessed that kind of behaviour. And it is quite shocking. So we've got a wide spread of what is acceptable, what is normal, what is wellness in the first place. Let me tell you how I behave with patients who come to me with, say, a life-threatening illness. Take cancer, for example. And they come and say, I've got a diagnosis of cancer. I say, yes. And I'm going to die. And I say, of course you're going to die. Now, it's a long conversation we're having, but the bottom line is that I'm asking the person, how are you living? Are you actually living? And you can do the same thing with people who've got major disabilities. If you've been paralysed and you find yourself no longer worthwhile in society, which is complete nonsense, how may I move forward in my concept of wellness and recognise that I do have a place in society, I am worthwhile, I can have a high quality of life, and what you think about my disability is utterly unimportant. We now come to people who are offering wellness services. Let's take, for example, something like Buteyko breathing. That's B-U-T-E-Y-K-O, Buteyko breathing, which would tell people, if you want to breathe better, breathe less. There's a whole study which goes through with asthma, for example, actually reducing your breathing, getting more carbon dioxide, actually stimulates your breathing more, which is also true, but very counterintuitive. You can get the same thing also with other forms of healthcare. For example, traditional Chinese medicine, taking herbs, which will cure based on the measurement of the energies in my pulses. A totally foreign concept to the Western medicine approach. And we, of course, call that alternative, because what we have in our medicine is called orthodox medicine, a nice Greek word which means correct. So anything not orthodox, by definition, must be wrong. And we're going to tolerate that. We'll make them alternative and go and see them when all else fails. And we judge alternative medicine based on that principle. It's not right, but it's not going to harm, so go and do it. Waste your money. And that's the current medical approach to a lot of the alternative medical care. Imagine that type of mindset, that medical mindset coming in to say, I'm going to pronounce judgment on this alternative health, hold you to a code of conduct, and sanction you if you don't live up to my standards. The devil is in the details. So one of my problems with bureaucrats is that once you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And when it comes to regulating things, isn't it fun as part of that board to be in charge? I will do this and have another regulation, another stipulation, which is just going to make it muddier, but also gives me a justification in my place as part of the board. I don't like them. I do recall being attacked myself by AHPRA. The question in case was a man had medication which was stopped by myself, something else given, and he then developed a heart rhythm disorder. So I was actually reported to AHPRA because I'd given the wrong medication. Yeah. What the person reporting me didn't understand was that the medication I stopped in the presence of asthma can cause sudden death. Not wise to give that. So you best avoid that kind of medication because you don't want people dying suddenly when you're treating this and that this effect has come in there. That's bad, bad look. Now, it went to a cardiologist, said, yep, fine, we can do that. This will be the suitable medication, and he went back onto different medication, all was good. But I was sanctioned by this person because he wanted to exert control on me. And he could then say, this Dr. Walker is being investigated for improper prescribing of medication, and it's held over your head. It took about 2 years for AHPRA to get his act together and decide it was a vexatious complaint. But in that time, whenever people asked if I want to do a locum, are you under investigation? Yes, you are. Oh, in that case, we can't have you. You see the power of giving this ability to bureaucrats who can then decide who they're going to have in favour and who not. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. What I'm saying is, members, be careful. This has unintended consequences, and we need to be aware of the very real risk of well-meaning approaches being banished because the people in charge think this is not the code of conduct we support. Now, we can take this further. Even now, and I've spoken about this in the chamber before, even now, we have got the problem of alternative opinions not being accepted. Fine. There's a famous joke, if you've got 2 doctors in a room, what do you have? You've got 3 opinions. And we can have very varied opinions because we look at the information and we make an assessment and we come to a different understanding, and so we can have a very much a nuanced approach to how do you treat something. It's true in the whole spectrum of wellness care. And in this particular case, we have the COVID vaccination, which, look, you can look on both sides of the argument, but the problem I have got is I've got colleagues who have produced science from institutions which gives an alternative approach to what passes for normal in our current government. Well-founded information, well-researched, backed up by peer-reviewed journals of a high quality, but does not actually follow what has been put on us by the current regime. And what then happened is that AHPRA has said there is an imminent and serious risk for public health by doctors putting the question out there. So the question itself is banned. And we're going to sanction the doctor, take away that person's right to work. Now, you might well say, yes, but we're not talking about doctors or other healthcare workers currently covered under AHPRA. This is here for the unregistered workers, but the principle is exactly the same. If you're going to get someone who is prescribing, for example, a course of treatment like in Pilates, and they develop a new idea for managing, say, a back pain, and someone happens to have an accident in using the machinery for that, they might then say, this whole thing is wrong. This person's got the wrong idea. We want them taken off the register. And of course, with the IPO here, as mentioned by my honourable colleague, they could then have that extended and again and lose their livelihood. Because if they're no longer able to practice because of an opinion by a board which follows down a path which doesn't allow that treatment to be used, then we have actually your means of putting food on the table for your family removed. And that I find unjust. But the principle is perfectly good. The principle is, if you're going to cause harm to the public or to yourself, you should not be practicing. and I heartily approve of that. But as I said, the devil is in the details. So keeping it simple, I think, would be really important. What is actually defined as a danger? Let's look at exactly where we would set the limits. And following on from what the report came back from the committee, I would be very much recommending that we do take a close look at how do we retain within our parliamentary procedures the power to actually make changes and not abrogate them to another body. I've touched on vexatious complaints. I've touched on future bias. Who can protect us from the opinions of those who are in charge? But in general, this is, I do think, an excellent bill, and I will, as said, be supporting this. But I would counsel, in the Committee of the Whole, I would counsel that we look very closely at how it may be improved to allow for the details not to become bedevilled.